we
Coming
were
up
a
on
different
Unleash
person. We
Thyself.
were a different kind of image of ourselves back then when we did whatever we did. And we only have the wherewithal and the knowledge based on that experience because of where we are now. And we wouldn't be where we are now if we wouldn't have experienced what we experienced. It's like kind of this, right?
Yes.
So part of it is it's okay to feel sad and to feel remorseful and to feel regretful over your past self because your past self didn't know any better. Your past self wasn't self-compassionate. Your past self
Mhm.
didn't use good judgment and maybe had a lot of, impulse control challenges.
Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to Unleash Thyself, a podcast where we journey into the depths of personal transformation, spirituality, and growth. I'm your host, Konstantin Morun, and today we welcome Dr. Michelle Maidenberg. Now, Michelle is a certified group therapist through the American Group of Psychotherapy Association and a diplomat and a certified member of the Academy of Cognitive Therapy. She is the author of the award-winning books Free Your Child from Overeating and the new book Ace Your Life. And I kind of like the subtitle here, Michelle. It's Unleash Yourself Best and Live the Life You Want. Whenever I see the word unleash, I can start smiling. Now, if that wasn't enough, right, Michelle, it's like you're a blogger for Psychology Today, where you've had over 1.7 million reads. I mean, that's amazing. And you've done a TED Talk recently on circumventing emotional avoidance. Now, you've also been featured in more than 150 national and international media, including the New York Times, Cosmopolitan, and so many more. And somehow you find time to maintain a practice in New York and be the co founder and clinical director of Through My Eyes, a nonprofit organization. And then somehow you also find time to be part of the faculty at NYU and you teach a course in mindfulness practice. I'd love to dive even deeper into that as well. Well, with that being said, Michelle, welcome. That's a
Thank you.
fabulous resume. That's beautiful. Now, how
Yeah.
do you find time for all of these things?
People always ask me that question. I'm so passionate. I really am with everything that I do. And, like anything, you have to schedule it or else it doesn't happen. So I make it my business to schedule things. And I really only commit to things that I really love. I think that's really important for me. I like want to wake up every morning and being excited like for the day ahead. And I really make it a point to make that happen for myself.
I love that. I love that. And more recently in my life, in the last few years, I've begun a journey where more time gets created
Mhm.
out of thin air. And then people ask me the same question: how do you have time for all these things? And I love your answer because it's similar to what I say. Hey, if I love what I do, it's gonna happen.
That's right.
And all
That's
of a
right. It's
sudden,
not a job. It's not a job. It's like a passion project.
exactly, exactly. Does anything that you do right now feel like a job, or everything is just purely driven by joy and passion and fulfillment?
You're probably gonna laugh. And it's funny when you said that, I was like, "Hmm." And what came up? Like the first thing in my mind, relationships.
Ah,
That
interesting.
yeah, I know, right? That sometimes feels very labor intensive for me,
Yeah.
because, I do have some, I would say, formative like struggles, wounds, childhood traumas, that definitely get in the way. And now, because I've done so much work, and in the past, I would say 3 years especially, I've, although I've been in therapy for many, many years, I think in the past 3 years, more so than ever, I'm really willing and open to being really raw and vulnerable and seeing
Mhm.
my like seeing really those parts of me that need healing. It's funny because, people always say to this to me, which you may hear is like, gosh, you went through so much, but look at you, you're amazing. And in the past, literally, I used to consider myself a warrior, and I still do. However, I was convinced that although I had, a little bit of a rough childhood, that I was unscathed, that I am one of those people, right,
Mm.
that were able to get through their childhood, come out at the other end, and like, I'm an anomaly. I'm amazing, right? But I didn't truly realize, and I saw it through my relationships, how much it actually affected me. And also connecting with the rawness about the havoc it wreaked in my mind and body, which I was completely, I think, avoidant of and repressed for so many years. And I did a wonderful job when I was a kid. That was like my go to adaptation, and it worked so well. And it did make me into the person I am today. However, it doesn't really work well in adulthood, let me tell you.
Oh, I feel that deeply. I literally feel everything you've explained there because sounds so close to what I've gone through as well, and it's beautiful to hear. Now, let me ask you this: you mentioned therapy, right? And you're someone that helps people with similar issues. Why do you? What can we tell people that are listening right now? And I know we have many in the audience that maybe are resistant to opening up to someone else, to getting raw and vulnerable, like you suggested. If someone is at that point where they're like, I don't know if I want to open up, I don't know if someone can help me fix this, how can we get them to see the other side? Perhaps not even get them, but like perhaps provide a perspective that allows them to be like, maybe I should talk to someone, maybe I should hire someone.
That is a great question. And I think what you're asking is what's the barrier between like recognizing that you have a challenge and actually really looking to go into the deep dive, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I think, I did my TED talk was on avoiding, circumventing emotional avoidance, right? So, our brains are wired to avoid danger and discomfort. And discomfort comes along with negative emotions because they're uncomfortable. Anger, frustration, sadness, like all of those deep, raw emotions are very uncomfortable. So, our brain naturally avoids them. And in order to really make transformation, we have to see ourselves. We have to really see ourselves, every part of ourselves, because, it's amazing, like people I work with, and even myself to some extent, right? You could be so super effective, highly effective in one area of your life and ineffective in another area. Like, how does that even make sense if you
Yeah.
think about it, right? It makes sense because we have parts of ourselves that get in the way at times, these barriers. And for somebody who wants to create change, I think just hearing what you said, like you need to get raw and you need to get into your deep feelings, that automatically may turn somebody off,
Yes.
right? Because they're not ready, able, or willing to do that. So I'm going to say, and this is, I really gauge the way I work based on where the person's coming from. And I really respect highly their adaptations, their protective mechanisms, their defensive. Those things actually served them well and protected them their whole life. If they're not willing to give that up, that's okay. No one's asking you to do that. So, what I would do in that case, for example, is a lot of my work is centered around our value system, right? And that is kind of our guide to action. So, you said in my subtitle is like unleash your best self and live the life you want. I use the word unleash purposefully because I believe that it is intrinsically in each of us.
Yes.
But there's something along the way that creates this barrier, that creates this smokescreen, this protective mechanism, this adaptation, whatever you want to call it, and that is what keeps us from being our authentic best self. And it's there. It literally has to be unleashed. And then you see your beauty and you see your golden shadow and you see your essence and your authenticity. I'll give you a personal example. I often, when I was younger, because I didn't have an outlet, I didn't have any way to express myself, I would become very angry and rageful. So anger is not scary to me at all. Like I actually appreciate anger. And for me, it was a source of strength. It was a source of being in control, all of those things, a false sense, of course. But
Well, yeah.
so I'm not adverse to anger or frustration, or rage, where a lot of people are, right? Um, and I've learned, like through the years, that that was obviously right an adaptation to help me feel strong and effective, but wasn't my authentic self. And what it came along with is me feeling like a mean person,
Mm, yes.
right? And I actually believed that about myself. I literally thought like there's a really mean part of me, And over the years, right, I prefer to see myself because this is my authentic self as a thoughtful, caring, generous human. And it's not enough for me to say that. It's not enough for me to preach that. I got to do actions so that I have evidence to support that idea. So now, today, if you said to me, oh, you're not a very thoughtful person, it wouldn't, I wouldn't like that you're saying that to me, of course, but it wouldn't affect me. I wouldn't get triggered because I know better. And I have actions to prove it. I could say to you, really? I'm not thoughtful? Well, I'll tell you because, right?
Mhm.
And I believe it. Like, I believe it at the gut.
Yeah.
It's not like nobody has to, like, convince me of it. I don't have to convince myself of it because I'm taking actions on behalf of it. But it wasn't until I really ventured into my values that I understood, you know, the essence of myself and what I wanted to stand for. Like, I want to leave this earth, and at my, funeral, when people, right, that's what they say about me, right? I want them to say that about me. Like, she was a thoughtful person. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was in me. That was in me. But there was a lot of barriers that, like, was in the way of allowing that to shine through. And also being generous and kind and, like, letting go of the anger and the frustration, which made me feel strong and powerful and in control, right? Then you get a lot of what? Insecurity, fear, right? Because what am I without that? And then you do the work, right?
I love what you talk about because I mean, it resonates so deeply with me as well, even to the anger piece and to the type of work I do right now, which is helping people find the values and the identity they hold, because it's so easy for us to identify with anything but who we truly are.
Yeah,
And I love, when you said unleash yourself best. I mean, this is the title of the podcast here, Unleash Thyself, Unleash.
yeah.
And the way I say it is like, know thyself before you can unleash thyself. And I felt that so much in my life and even in the journey of doing this podcast, because like I said, there's so many barriers. I call them stories. We have so many stories we've taken on from whoever in our life, somehow made them our own, but really they're not ours. And that clouds our judgment, that clouds everything. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, in your case, right, or in the way you work, how can one start to remove some of these barriers that have been put in place from maybe at a time when you can't even remember? Maybe you're one or two or three.
Yeah. I mean, some of it is pre-verbal. I think that's what you're saying, right? Some of it
Exactly.
literally is pre-verbal. And I work with people where literally this woman I'm working with, she remembers, like, you know, being in her crib and, like, crying and wanting her parents to pay attention to her and to attend to her. And she just sat there, and, like, it became like a learned helplessness because nobody attended to her. This is like pre-verbal,
Yeah.
and also when we're younger, because of our ego, we tend to blame ourselves for everything
Mm,
because our brains are not sophisticated enough to understand anything different, right? So it becomes about what we did wrong, what we could have done better. It's a whole kind of cognition thing that goes on.
So let me
So,
stop you there for a second, if I may.
yeah,
So that means that
sure.
if, let's say I'm a young child, well,
Uh-huh.
we all were at some point, and
Yeah.
let's say my mom raises her voice at me because she's upset of something else, then I
Yeah.
internalize it as me doing something wrong.
That's right.
Ah,
That's
okay.
right. And I am bad.
Yeah.
And I am not, I'm causing my mother to be upset.
Mm,
Right? There's just so much guilt and shame, right? And also adaptations. So I'm going to be perfect so mom doesn't have to yell at me,
mm,
right? And I am going to whatever, right? Do whatever I need to do, right, in order to manage my mom's feelings, and moods, or
yeah.
whatever the case is. There's so many things that happen. And it's so interesting because when I talk about people and I ask them to, like, connect to a memory or something, sometimes they'll tell me there's, like, one thing that happened when they were younger that changed the course of their lives because they had such, like, these grounded narratives and perceptions about the thing that happened. So
Mm,
it's not about the things that happen to us, it's our perceptions about what happened,
yes.
right? Because I could experience, you and I could experience the same thing. And guess what? We're going to have different perceptions about it. So, like, I'll give you an example. Like, somebody, which is a horrible, horrible tragedy, trauma, somebody gets raped. Okay. some people that I see become very self-blaming, right? And self-deprecating. And I could have done something. I shouldn't have done something. It was my fault, whatever, right? So a lot of self-blame. And then there's another person that completely recognizes that this should not have happened to them under any circumstances. And, it's completely, the perpetrator who perpetrated, right, etc. They're going to experience their trauma differently. They
Yeah.
will. Yeah. So it's again, it's understanding. And it also has to do with their past traumas, how they experience that trauma. There's so many layers to why we process things the way we do. It has to do with our genetics, our predispositions, how we're raised social, culturally, race, religion, gender. I mean, yeah, there's like so
Environment.
many vast things that affect us,
I think
and our perceptions about things. Totally. So when you want to go venture into healing, let's say, right? You have to recognize what's not working for you,
mm,
right? And I do. I ask people like, what challenges are you finding? So we'll kind of list them, and how do you see that? How does it affect you? How does it impact you? In what areas of your life? And then I put it in orders of priority, like which is affecting you more, or the most. And how do you, or what, in order of priority, how do you want to work on these things? And so it's a real collaborative process. And I use a lot of myself in the process,
yeah.
right? So, like, I'm working with somebody now who has pretty significant, interpersonal relationship like challenges that come up. And unfortunately, it's resulted in like her switching schools. She's at her second college. She's actually going to venture into her second college, but and then she has a history of like going to school and camp where there was a lot of ruptured relationships. And now she has a summer job and she's having significant issues come up too. So I said to her, it's great that you're transferring schools, but like we have to look at kind of the trajectory and we have to look at the history, and the chances are this is going to show up again,
Yes.
right? Because it's patterns of behavior. And we could do the blame game and say it was that person, it was that person, it was that person in every one of those incidences, which it may be. I don't say not, but like where's your responsibility in that too? Because right, it's a relationship. Any relationship has two people or more, right?
Yeah.
And right, and where can you see yourself? And we've been working on that. So I've had her do some very challenging things that are really challenging, like her perceptions, and it was great because last night it just so happens she's having some issue at work now. And I implored her to send a text to her boss. And when she was here with me, she was like, "Oh, I don't know if I could do that." I said, "I know it's really hard, but like, what's the worst thing that could happen?" And we went over what's the best thing what's the most likely thing to happen. We kind of went through the whole thing. And I had her send the text in my office because I knew that once she leaves here, the chances are she's not going to send it. And also, I got to process with her, what did that feel like? What's going through your mind? How did it feel for me to ask you to do this? How are you feeling towards me? Right? Because she doesn't really make herself vulnerable and talk about more interpersonal, interrelational types of vulnerabilities. So I modeled that for her in the session so that she gets, and what was so amazing is last night she reached out to me. She texted me. She goes, "Can we talk for a few minutes?" Now, here's a person that would never ordinarily do that. And I was like, I felt so proud of her, that she reached out to me, right? Because that's just like not anything she would ever do. She would just very impulsively, have very, very visceral reactions to things and then act out. And she took a pause and she said, wait, let me really kind of reach out and get guidance because the likelihood is like, and she said, and she even said this to me, which I was like, yes. She said, if I do this, is this like my way out? Am I not really leaning into, right, and challenging myself? I was like, what?
That's beautiful. What a
Yeah.
beautiful story, Michelle. A few things come up for me, right? Like, it's like I remember. I mean, I have a younger sibling, 5 years younger than me, And I know that even when we look back at the same stories that we were both part of, we both have such different perspectives, right? And one of us can be traumatized by it, and one of us maybe
Yeah.
not so much, right? And I resonate with that so deeply. And what I've, with the example you gave, what's really interesting is that I've noticed in my life and the life of many people I get to interact with is that we all seem to have this idea that we can run away from the problems without thinking that we're running away from the problem. It's like, oh, if this relationship doesn't work, I'm going to go and I'm start another one,
Hmm.
and the same things somehow magically repeat themselves. Or my boss is toxic. I don't like this job. I quit this and I go to my next job, and magically it happens again.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I have a math degree background with engineering and computer science, going through school in Romania where I was born, and then in Canada for high school and university. And at no point do they teach you any of this stuff. It's never
Oh,
about
yeah.
looking at yourself, right? It's always about looking externally and quote
Hmm.
unquote using the victim card. If someone does something to you, you're the victim, and it's not about looking at what have you done that maybe put you in the situation so you can learn for next time. It's not to blame yourself, like you said. It's not to bring judgment. It's like, what can I learn from this? Have I had a play in it or a part to play in it?
Mm.
I wonder how that conversation seems to be a bit tougher with more horrific acts like the one I described earlier. So I'm curious, like, how does one navigate that in their life? If you have something really bad happen to you, and
Hmm.
not blaming yourself too much, because you talked about some people blame themselves too much and some not at all. Is there
Yeah.
a harmony to be found, or are some acts such that you have no part to play in it?
Yeah. So there are some, listen, some things that people feel regret over. They did do something wrong or they made a mistake or whatever the case is. I
Hmm.
mean, right? Not everything's peachy keen. So, I also say, and this is like so important, and I listen, who doesn't have regrets, right? Like it's part of it's what helps us to grow and to learn and to change, right? But guess what? We were a different person. We were a different kind of image of ourselves back then when we did whatever we did. And we only have the wherewithal and the knowledge based on that experience because of where we are now. And we wouldn't be where we are now if we wouldn't have experienced what we experienced. It's like kind of this, right?
Yes.
So part of it is it's okay to feel sad and to feel remorseful and to feel regretful over your past self because your past self didn't know any better. Your past self wasn't self-compassionate. Your past self
Mhm.
didn't use good judgment and maybe had a lot of, impulse control challenges, right?
Yeah.
And I could tell you that I one, relationship that I'm thinking about, I have a lot of regret. I think I was in a space where I was blaming and blaming, and I realize, now, of course, can't go back in time, but I realize that I wasn't my best self in that relationship because I would get triggered. But that still wasn't okay or didn't give me a free card to behave the way I did.
Mm.
And that I take ownership for and responsibility for, and I have regret for. And guess what? It has taught me so much about how I want to present myself in relationships going forward. And I will not be accepting of being that kind of wounded person or a part in a relationship going forward because that is not really being my best self. So I'm so cognizant of that, so cognizant. And I sometimes get really sad. Like I sometimes could sit there and feel such a void and could feel so incredibly sad about like the distress that I must have been going through at that time to have behaved that way.
Mm.
And I feel compassion for that part of me. I feel compassion for that wounded part that was so stuck, and sometimes I cry for her, and sometimes I hug her, and sometimes I wish her well.
That's powerful.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's hard.
It is. I mean, life is hard, right? All the things happening in
Yeah.
our environment, and a
Yeah.
part of it. So then we absorb a lot more than we think we do. It's
Yes.
powerful. Now, I'm curious, how does mindfulness play into all that you do? Because you do teach a course on mindfulness practice. How do you bring that in?
Mindfulness interweaves in everything I'm talking about. It's really, if, in a nutshell, right? And I'm sure you've heard about it and talked about it on your podcast. Um, it's really creating space between the thinking and doing. And it's doing that and being in the present moment, non judgmentally, right? And purposefully and effortfully. So our brain is wired to always be in the past, which is regret and shame, or in the future, which is worry, and we're on autopilot. Like even when we do things, we go places, we don't think about what we're doing, we just do it. It's rote. I don't know about you, sometimes I'll forget what I had for breakfast, or I'll forget, like, where I was going. you know, it happens all the time. I'm like, huh? Right. So we have to purposefully be in the present moment with conscious awareness, so that the present moment could be meaningful to us, because our brain holds on to, kind of discomfort, negativity. It doesn't hold on to happiness and joy, because it doesn't need to protect you from anything
Yeah.
when you're in a happy or joyful or content circumstance. So I purposefully, I try to, at least in my moments, to connect to my visceral feelings that are going on inside my body. And I'll even, like, I'll if I have an interaction with somebody and I'm moved emotionally, I'll take a second, even when I'm talking, to feel it, or I'll take a moment afterwards to say, like,
Mhm.
wow, that was incredible. Like, I'll have a session, let's say, and I'll have a really pivotal moment with a client. um, this is another example. I had a client who I was working with. She was a medical student, and she was taking a really, really important board exam. And it literally was making or breaking her future, like literally. And she was so anxious. You can imagine she was having performance anxiety because of her anxiety, which, of course, why does she have anxiety? Because it's so important to her and it's so critical. It's like a really critical test. It's not even a joke, right? And we did a lot of mindfulness and anxiety based kind of interventions and skills. And she texted me afterwards and she passed. And she said to me, she said, gosh, I feel such gratitude, to have partnered with you. And I really don't know how I would have done this without you. And like, she was just so appreciative, and like, and she texted me to let me know. And I literally, like, had tears running down my face, because I felt her. And I said to her, I said, you are amazing. I said, like, we did this together, right? We partnered in this for you. And I said, I'm so appreciative that you let me help you,
Mhm.
and yeah, and I took a moment afterwards, because it was like such a moment. And I took a moment of gratitude for myself and for my skills and for being able to connect to her and for making this impact, and on, because that's what builds my confidence.
Exactly. I mean, you gotta take time to celebrate yourself sometimes, right? And that's
Right, but
another
if you're
thing.
not taking those mindful moments, you're not making these connections. They're literally, it's like a slide. It's like it just goes whoosh, it slips right away from us. And
Mhm.
we don't get the same meaning and power from our connections and our relationships. And, even listen, there's so much going on in the world right now. Gosh, it's like mind blowing, literally. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And, we need to check in with ourselves. How are we? What are we thinking? What are we feeling? Like, we need to do that, because there's just so much stimulation around us all the time.
Yes, yes. That's been a big one for me in the last few years, realizing how easily distracted we are and how much opportunity for distraction there is
Yeah.
between devices and other vices that one may have to get distracted. And I was very good at finding ways to distract myself in the past. So I
By
can,
the way, it's not hard to do that. There's a lot of ways to distract ourselves, isn't there? There's, like, I mean, we don't even have to look far.
exactly. Because I mean, you mentioned at the beginning why we do that, right? Why we avoid our emotions because it feels painful in the moment.
Yeah.
In my experience, and I'm curious to see your experience here, but my experience is that yes, it feels painful on the surface, and your ego, your mind wants to keep you away from it because it's change, potential for change, which is dangerous. But once you face it, once you, let's say, get through it, it's actually a lot easier than one may think.
Yes, and it's not only that it's dangerous, but we also, our brain, we have neural pathways. So once we learn something, right, it creates this neural pathway. It's so you could think about it as like if you kind of walk through a grassy pasture, right?
Mhm.
Like if you keep walking through the same exact like, you know, what's the
Path,
word?
yeah.
Path. Thank you. If you keep on walking through the same path, eventually what's going to happen to the grass?
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be that natural pathway. Well, if you then invite people to kind of again, right, walk on the grass, people instinctively are going to walk on that pathway,
Oh, great
right?
point. Yes.
Like it could be a vast piece of land, okay? But you'll see, like if you do an experiment, you'll see like you have this vast piece of land, people are naturally going to segue into the pathway. A, because we're wired like do the right thing, don't walk on the grass, right? But also because our mind naturally just goes there, that's where we're supposed to walk, right? Yeah. That is what our brain does. When we have experiences, we gravitate towards the familiarity. Okay. And that familiarity makes us feel, again, more comfortable
Safe.
because we know what to expect. We know what to expect. So we repeat the same patterns, even if it is uncomfortable. Okay. Because our brains take the path of least resistance. Our brains do not like to work hard. They don't. It doesn't. It's like, this is familiar. This is comfortable. I'm going to take that pathway. Yeah. And often not very productive. People always say to me, I don't understand. Why do I keep on gravitating towards the same type of people? Or why do I always find myself in the same situation? Or why, again, yeah, we're creatures of habit. That's what we do. So, when you talk about barriers, there's so many different things that kind of get in the way, you know, at all times. It's not just like danger and discomfort, it's neural pathways. There's like so many, in my book, it's a method by which to live by. So, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And what I do in that is the first part of each chapter talks about the barriers. I
Mm,
spent a whole chapter on each of them talking about the barriers because there are so many. And we need to understand what they are because when we're up front, right, close and up front, we could see it and say, up, there goes my mind, or up, there goes whatever, like I'm going to do things different. And then, right, the second chapter of each talks about how to integrate it and actually how to use skills and practice so that we can work through the barriers.
absolutely. No,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful, vivid example as well, because it makes sense as to why we would be doing that, right? The path of least resistance. I mean, same as I'm thinking now, what comes up for me is like a river, how it gets formed. Water is not going to push in parts it can go through. It's going to find the easiest path forward and it goes through. So
I
we have
love
this
that.
example in nature everywhere.
I
It's
may
just,
use that. I may use that example.
yeah, of course. Because I'm like, oh, but it makes so much sense, right? Because you form these pathways,
Yeah.
but because you form them, it means you also have the power to form new ones. It's just going to take a bit more work.
Well, talking about mindfulness, we have seen because of current technology through MRIs that mindfulness practice actually changes the structure of our brain. We could see it on MRIs. It's fascinating. So, what happens throughout our lives and throughout our development and throughout, right, is we actually deplete the gray matter in our brain, our hypothalamus. And with mindfulness practice, it actually forms new gray matter in your brain, which affects focusing, attention, concentration, so many other things.
Yeah, like being in the moment, right? Which are those are
Yes.
all elements of being in the moment.
Yes. So like that is like a way we could actually change the structure of our brain. How amazing is that?
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, in the last 2+ years, I've gone a lot deeper from like no mindfulness practices other than, walking in nature randomly on hikes to quite a lot where, every day I do at least an hour or so plus more. And it's changed my life entirely.
Yeah,
because at least being in the present moment, if nothing else. But all the relationships I have, everything has improved significantly
that's
because of
amazing.
that, right? And I can attest to it, and I've seen it in so many people. And you see it on the other side as well, people that don't give themselves enough time to do that, because that's actually something you're doing for yourself.
Yes,
But not a lot of us give ourselves that grace to be able to do it. It's actually pretty powerful.
absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. I'm definitely gonna have to grab the book and check it out. Do you have an audio version for the book, or just the
I do. I'm so excited. A couple of weeks ago, I actually narrated it myself, which I was
Beautiful.
so excited to do. And it's finally on audiobook. I don't know about you, but I'm a big audiobook
Me too.
person.
Like
Yeah, I don't have
99% is
time.
audio.
I know. I do it while I'm getting ready in the morning and like, when I'm driving. And I've gotten through so many books that way, which I
Mhm.
never used to. So I love that. So I was like persistent about doing the audiobook because I know there are people out there like me. And yeah, the audiobook's out. It's about 7 hours or so of a
Yeah,
book.
that's beautiful. Must have
Yeah,
taken you a bit of time to put it together then.
it did, but it was challenging, I have to say, but it was definitely like a labor of love.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, and now just something came to mind. Might be related by this. As you're narrating and then going through it, has it ever occurred to you, like, oh, maybe I should have said this differently, or maybe I should have added this in there? Or,
Yeah, well, you know what? You know what I definitely discovered, which I'm laughing. I use a lot of etceteras.
ah,
Yeah, I use a lot of etceteras, and when you're reading it, it's okay, but
yeah.
when you're doing it by audiobook, it's different. Oh,
Yeah.
and I probably shouldn't have said that because now if you're listening to the audiobook, you're gonna be, like, focusing on the etceteras. So I
You should have
apologize for
context
that.
in them, be like, I caught this many.
Exactly.
Oh, that's beautiful, Michelle. Wow. Okay. So so many directions. But when it comes to what you teach in your mindfulness practice, just to come full circle there, what are some of the top things you've discovered in your experience that truly can move the needle for someone, even someone that's not very versed in anything mindfulness?
You know what? I'm so big on like kind of doing a value assessment and evaluation every day of my life, and I teach that. And I also, I have a whole chapter on that, and how we extrapolate our values and what they mean and why they're important and all that. And I think again, in anything, you have to find what's important to you, and with mindfulness, just like exercising or anything else, you can't have a rationalization. Oh, that's not good. It doesn't work for me. It's too hard, or that I don't like that, or whatever. Go through the alphabet. Like if that type of practice doesn't work for you, go to B, C, D, E. Find something that works, right? So mindfulness is vast.
It is.
It's not just meditative practice. Listen, I teach a 15-week course on mindfulness. That's how much information, right? And by the way, I could teach a lot more than
I
that.
was gonna say it's probably could be a year worth of stuff, if not more.
Yeah, so for moving the needle, like take things incrementally. Don't push yourself because like I compare it to exercise. People who go in the gym, right? New Year's resolution, I'm going to go to the gym, and they go full speed ahead, and then what happens? They get like,
And
they lose their steam. Yeah, right? Either they get injured or they have, right, like they get cramping or something, and then they're like, oh, this is not for me, No, like do it slowly, do it incrementally, find the things you like and then you connect to, and that means something to you. And that has to do with both like kind of tapping into our vulnerability. It has to do with finding mindfulness practices that work for you. It has to do with even finding like a practitioner or therapist that you connect to. You're not going to connect to everybody,
yes.
right? So you're not going to want to go, you're not going to want to do the work, you're not going to be dedicated and committed unless you feel it's worth it. And I can't even implore enough, which is a lot of the work, like connect to your values, because that is what's going to sustain behavior over time. The issue with people, it's not the issue with change and transformation. People know how to do that. There's so many resources. It's the sustainability and the lifelong practice that's the issue. And that's my whole chapter on empowerment, because we have a hard time sustaining behavior,
Yes.
and for some people, it's harder than others. Listen, there's so many books out now on changing habits, right? Because people struggle with it so much. But it's not about just doing it behaviorally. You have to do it emotionally and psychologically, and that's where I come in.
Yeah,
You know, because a habit is a habit, but if you're not invested in a deep rooted way, you're going to lose steam.
exactly.
I see it all the time.
Because a habit is like the way I say it, it's like it's very surface level, which means that the lenses you're seeing it through is what's going to dictate how it's going to turn up in your life. And the lenses are the stories that we talked about, right?
Yeah,
Those things that happened in our life that we took on, and now we see life through that lens. So it
correct.
makes 100% sense there, right? You have
Yeah,
to look below the surface. What's the root cause of
correct.
why something doesn't stick? It makes sense. Beautiful. Michelle, I know we have a hard stop here in a few minutes. So before I let you go, is there anything else that comes up for you that you'd like to share with us? Anything top of mind?
I just have to say that like life is so fleeting and we are so fragile and every life is worth living to its utmost. I can't say that enough. I see, unfortunately, you can only imagine, what I see and who I see and what I hear. And sometimes and usually things are out of our control, right? So we don't have moments to waste, literally. We don't have moments to waste. I always say we came into this world crying, we want to leave this world smiling. Yeah.
That's
So it's never too late to start, ever, ever, ever.
yes. Ah, I love that so much. That's a beautiful message to leave the audience with. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. This was a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of personal transformation. Your presence and engagement are at the heart of what we do, and I sincerely appreciate you, your time, and thirst for knowledge, inspiration, and empowerment. Please consider showing your support by hitting like, subscribe, leaving a comment, or writing a review. Your engagement not only fuels our mission, but also helps others discover these insights. For more daily guidance on personal transformation across the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical realms, be sure to visit our website at unleashthyself.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Unleash Thyself Today, TikTok and YouTube at Unleash Thyself, and there we post daily content designed to inspire and empower you on your journey. If you have any specific thoughts, questions, or feedback, I truly value your input. I would love to hear from you. Together, we're building a community united in authenticity and purpose. Once again, thank you for being a part of this movement. Until next time, continue to embrace your true self and live a life on purpose, with purpose. See you in the next episode.